In this video, I'm going to show you George Harrison's Ransom guitar and to tell you the story behind it. I got to see it in person, so of course I made a video of it. And the whole thing is just a crazy little rock and roll vignette. As you'll see in this headline, the Ransom guitar sold recently for $312,000. And as you'll note in the headline as well, this is really a tale of two guitars, both of them being George's. So let's look at and discuss both of them and tell the story how one was traded for the other. Here's the first, an instrument he was very fond of, but that'll come out in the story. The guitar Lucy. And Lucy is such a big part of Harrison's biography that Lucy has her own Wikipedia page, which I thought was pretty cool. Heck, Lucy is such a big deal that you can own a special limited edition custom recreation, like this one here, one of only 25, for just over $20,000. Again, that's for a recreation. Anyway, the real Lucy was a 1957 Les Paul of a certain type made only in that year and a little bit of the following. It had a factory gold finish and ended up in the hands of John Sebastian of the band The Lovin' Spoonful. And he ended up trading it to Rick Derringer of the band The McCoys. And it was Derringer who had it converted into the red finish. In his words, quote, "It was a very, very used guitar, even when I got it. So I figured that since we didn't live far from Gibson's factory in Kalamazoo, the next time the group went there, I'd give it to Gibson and have it refinished. I had it done at the factory in the SG style, clear red finish that was popular at the time." End quote. What Derringer doesn't relate in that quotation, which is funny, is that he loved the guitar as is, but his father complained that it looked beat up, so that's why he got it redone. And the McCoys were a big deal, by the way. They had a huge hit, this one here, which, as a child, I always thought said, "Hang on, Snoopy," and I wasn't alone. Back to Derringer and his soon-to-be world-famous guitar. Well, he ended up not being enthralled with the red look after all, so he sold the guitar to Dan Armstrong, who had a guitar shop in Greenwich Village. Quick aside, Dan Armstrong had opened up that shop with his last $400, but it ended up becoming a go-to for people like Jack Bruce, Jimi Hendrix, and Eric Clapton. And speaking of Clapton, it was only a few days after Armstrong had purchased the guitar that Clapton walked in and bought it. Here he is playing one of the reproductions that was presented to him. Well, he ends up giving it to his buddy George Harrison, of course, of the Beatles. And this was in August of 1968. And this picture is of Clapton playing one of the Lucy reproductions, by the way. Anyway, all of this leads us to the making of the single While My Guitar Gently Weeps. It was written by George Harrison, but the band was having trouble with it, and they were just in a troubled time anyway as they were working on the White Album. And this, by the way, being the first time that John's girlfriend Yoko Ono sat in on Beatles recording sessions. And like I said, the attempts to record While My Guitar Gently Weeps were not going well. It's said George's bandmates didn't think too much of the song. He gets the idea then to have his friend Eric Clapton come in and play on the record. And this was kind of a big deal because, as Clapton said himself, people don't play on the Beatles albums. So George had to talk him into it, and the flip side of the plan was that he figured his bandmates would kind of have to be on their best behavior with a guest musician in the room. And then obviously Clapton was a brilliant guitar player to boot. Why are we talking about this song anyway? Because Lucy was the guitar that Clapton played on that session, the guitar he had earlier given his friend. It was George Harrison that christened the guitar Lucy, by the way. Once he got it, Harrison named it after the world's most famous and favorite at the time redhead, Lucille Ball. So all's well and good. George Harrison loves Lucy. Get it? Clapton played it on a Beatles record. George Harrison uses it for years, which of course includes playing it on more historic Beatles recordings. So everything is fine. Until his home is broken into and it is stolen. And this was at George's California home, Beverly Hills to be precise, and in 1973. Well, that sucked, and here's where things started to get really weird. Harrison is trying to track down the guitar and pretty quickly learns that it ended up being sold at the legendary Wayland's Sound City music store on the equally famous Sunset Boulevard. But as you just heard, the guitar had already been sold, the owner having no idea what instrument had just passed through his hands. The sale price was $682, by the way. And who bought it? Well, a founding member of this band here, La Fachada de Piedra, the stone facade from Guadalajara, Mexico. There are various articles and whatnot about the Ransom guitar we're focusing on today, and I know you haven't actually focused on it yet. We're setting the stage. But anyway, those articles are all pretty much cut and paste and don't mention much at all about Miguel Ochoa, the band member here who acquired Lucy. I had to go down a rabbit hole of reading articles in Spanish to learn about him and his band. They were a pretty big deal south of the border. Ochoa is the dude with the long hair, and he certainly kept that look for a long time. Here's the band around the time of their 40-year anniversary. And if you're interested in the sound of the band, they kind of sound like Cream, is how I would put it. And their stuff, or a lot of it, is in English on YouTube. But the important thing for us is that Ochoa has Lucy. And luckily for Harrison, Ochoa had signed a sales receipt. After all, he didn't know he was buying stolen goods. So he left the phone number of the place in LA where he was staying, because he was just visiting from Mexico, crashing with a friend who subsequently receives a phone call from an irate George Harrison. Could you imagine getting that random phone call in 1973? The friend, Mark Harvey, tells Ochoa about it, who thought the whole thing had to be a prank. Details are not as clean as I would like on what exactly happened next. There were multiple negotiations. I'm not sure if they went through Harvey or they were directly between Harrison and Ochoa. But the one version of events that gets cut and pasted all over the place says that Ochoa left to Mexico with the guitar. I would really like to corroborate that. This seems like a jerk move, and this is a fellow musician, and you're in contact with George Harrison. It turns out you have his guitar. Like, why wouldn't you want to just go over and hand it to him and get to meet him? And if it is that Ochoa just ran off to Mexico because now he realized how valuable it was, then why would he end up agreeing to do a trade for the guitar I'm going to show you at the end of this video and another bass guitar? It's just two kind of, very nice but anonymous guitars. I mean, why wouldn't he say, you're a Beatle, give me $100,000 or whatever, instead of accepting two guitars that together don't add up to the tiniest fraction of Lucy's value? So I tend to believe the alternate, less seen version of the story, which for instance is on guitarworld.com, where Harrison only makes contact with Ochoa once the latter is already back in Mexico. And it could be that he legitimately did think it was a prank and said, well, here's my flight today to head back home, and did. And then he ends up hearing directly from Harrison. And part of the confusing lore here is that supposedly, and you can definitely underline supposedly, George Harrison threatened to send people down there to break some legs, which would be the most un-George Harrison thing to say ever. When someone, either the guitar shop owner or Ochoa's friend, said, you might not get this back. It's down in Mexico, and, who knows what's going to happen. But getting away from hearsay, what we can say definitely happened is the deal was agreed to, and Ochoa asked for a Les Paul 58 Sunburst guitar and a Fender Precision bass. So Harrison, and I believe the guitar shop owner from Wayland, who's trying to make this all right, now they have to find that. So Harrison ends up getting at least the Sunburst guitar from Norman's Rare Guitars. So just what a crazy story, but eventually this guitar here gets sent down to Mexico with the bass in question, and Lucy is returned to George, where she belongs. The whole incident would be referred to by George Harrison as the kidnapping. Miguel Ochoa, by the way, kept and used this guitar all the way until 1981. And this whole escapade could have been avoided if the Wayland's Sound City shop had followed the law, incidentally, which required you hold on to a guitar like that for 30 days before selling. If they had done that, the police would have found it there during the investigation, when they were inquiring with all the guitar shops in town in the wake of the crime. And that is our story. Like I said, a crazy little rock and roll vignette. Lucy thereafter remained with George until his death in 2001. Thank you for watching.